I mentioned already that some aspects of anthropology and some aspects of generally studying humans are controversial, and if we look at the early stages of 19th century anthropology, there is definitely more than one dark side to it. And one of such dark aspects of anthropology, so perhaps the wrong conclusions that could be harmful and potentially even lead to human tragedy, was the invention of scientific racism in the 19th century. There were some scholars who tried to propose that the physical differences between different human races, so different variations of humans concerning the color of the skin or the most widespread facial feature, the shape of the nose, the shape of the jaws, and the shape of the skulls generally, were indications of deep biological differences that would include also intellectual abilities, moral abilities, the propensity to crime or something like that. So scientific racism was one of the backgrounds that led to the colonial expansion and especially the neo-imperialism in Africa, especially in Africa, which was colonized later in the 19th century after, let's say, the places such as India, which could not really be dismissed as barbaric. There were some attempts, but this was high culture. Nobody doubted that. Chinese culture was believed to be old and legit, let's say it. But the African tribes were... people had dark skin, they didn't wear many clothes, and they basically looked so much different than the Europeans. For some scientists, going from the evolutionary perspective, this was evidence that these people are intellectually inferior. They may be, let's say, more fit physically, they would be better athletes, but they were no intellectuals, and they were absolutely, compared to the Europeans, they were silly, childlike, and also dangerous. They were the savages, they were the barbarians. Of course, this is now completely disproved, and nobody, well, hopefully, at least no serious scholar thinks like that. Another dark side of early anthropology is eugenics. Eugenics was a belief, a kind of pseudoscience really, that human societies can improve and accelerate the pace, the natural pace of evolution by, let's say, conscious breeding, like with animals. Like you have different breeds of dogs or cattle. So you pair the animals that have the best traits for you, so the most useful traits for humans, or something that the humans like, I don't know, the long hair, or the cows that give more milk, or the dogs that have sweet, cute faces. They breed them, and then the genetic pool of this animal species can be improved to benefit humans. Some scholars, like Francis Galton, who was a relative of Darwin, and intellectuals like the great writer George Bernard Shaw, believed that human societies should behave in a similar way. So that here we have a fragment of a poster from this period. We are talking about late 19th century, early 20th century. Only healthy seed must be sown, meaning only physically and intellectually superior humans should be allowed to have children. And the poor and the crippled and everyone who is not deemed superior should be at least discouraged from reproduction, in the most extreme cases prevented from reproduction by being sterilized or even killed. Yes, this leads to what the Nazis were doing, what they were doing to the inferior races. This is another type of scientific racism. If you look at it, well, there might be something good in it, like it's all for improvement, for the benefit of the group, for the benefit of the race. But there is one big question. Who should decide who is superior and who is inferior? And this is the question that cannot be answered without actually leading to human tragedy almost immediately. So eugenics, together with scientific racism, goes down the drain and to the waste bin of anthropology. The last one is social Darwinism. So the belief that social classes are also natural expression of the superiority of the genes of certain people. Here we have a little cartoon. So we have two people talking, and the man asks, what is social Darwinism? And the woman answers, the survival of the richest. So they believe that if you are rich or if you are an aristocrat, it means your family for many generations had better genes. They were superior. So if you are poor, it's your own fault, or it's the fault of your ancestors. It means you are less talented, less skillful, less, brave or anything. You lack some positive traits that the current upper class or the rich have. So, yes, again, excuse the word, bullshit. So, serious study of human behavior can lead to wrong answers. And this is something to be wary of, that not all scientists come to good conclusions. Not all scientists have good intentions. For some, it was just looking for the excuse to exterminate someone or to colonize and enslave someone. So that's really something to bear in mind and to take as a warning. Next week we'll look at the life and work of many anthropologists. Let me just give you one here, because this is perhaps a positive example that not everybody thought in this way. An American scholar, Lewis Henry Morgan, from the 19th century as well. He also believed in this evolutionary approach. So he thought that there is a line of development from savagery to barbarism to civilization. He believed that there are better, more developed civilizations. Of course, his own was the best and the most developed. And those who remained in the, let's say, tribal state, they were less advanced. But he believed that in time they will catch up. And one of the things that are important about this scholar is that he started experimental anthropology. He was an archaeologist, so he was well aware of the fact that you need to go to the places you study and dig there. And he got interested in ethnography, so studying of not the extinct cultures, but the still existing cultures. And living in America, there were still some Native American tribes, so the American Indians, and he got particularly interested in the culture of the Iroquois. He went and studied their customs, studied their beliefs, and eventually he was even accepted as a member of the tribe. So he did not treat them as inferior, as people who need to be subjugated and colonized. He treated them with respect as his subjects of study. So it could be possible. And for the remainder of today's class, I would like to very briefly introduce you to two men who really dominate the study of human social behavior from the middle of the 19th century until today basically, and probably long in the future, namely Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud, and everything that happens in social studies and in the humanities and in literary studies at all after the 19th century. As you can see, Marx was older. He was most active in the mid-19th century. Freud was born in the mid-19th century, and he was most active at the turn of the 20th century. But their influence is enormous. They have been analyzed and elaborated on and contested and discussed, and it never stops. And if you look at the careers and the writings of these two men, neither of them was an ethnographer or an anthropologist as such. Marx was a philosopher, an economist and a political theorist, and Sigmund Freud was a medical doctor, a psychologist and psychoanalyst. So he had patients, he tried to cure mental diseases, and he wrote about that and whatever that taught him. And if we really want to give the bottom line, like what is Marx's theory about and what is Freud's theory about, like what is the foundation of human behavior, why humans do the things they do. For Marx, the answer is always money, the material conditions, the class system. This is the result of the inequality in the distribution of wealth. Everything, absolutely everything, including the mental life, is the result of money. And Freud would say, no, everything, and I mean absolutely everything, including the material conditions, is the result of sex drive. So the instincts, the unconscious desires and taboos and complexes that people have without even knowing that fully. So this is a very, very simplified look, but let's now look a little bit about on Marx's theory and Freud's theory. So if you probably heard about them in high school, haven't you? So for Marx, everything is about conflict. It's about some groups that have more than others, and those who have less want to have more. So we have, this is really the kind of social system he observed in Britain. He was German, but he moved to Britain. He saw Britain in the 19th century, the Victorian period, the outburst of industrialization, urbanization, and the beginning of capitalism, the system, the economic system of capitalism, in which there were basically two groups: the bourgeoisie, the middle class, who controlled the means of production, who controlled the factories, who possessed the factories and employed the working class, that is the proletariat. This is the word he used. So these groups, of course, were very different in their wealth. So conflict, class conflict, was inevitable. The result, according to Marx, was that sooner or later, and he believed the sooner the better, this conflict would lead to revolution. So the working class, who were poorer but they were more numerous, would learn, would have the knowledge about their own oppression, and they will rebel, and the result of that would be the new system, which he called socialism, which in turn would develop into an even more egalitarian system, which he called communism. He wrote that in his first very influential book, The Communist Manifesto, which was like the manual, the manifesto for the proletariat to become aware of their sorry situation and take some action. He later, together with his friend Friedrich Engels, wrote another book, Capital, and the class conflict is the most important thing. And for him, the functioning of everything, the society, but also the human mind, uses a simple pyramid structure, a little bit like Maslow's pyramid, but it's just two things: the base and the superstructure. The base is the material conditions, the money, the possessions that you have, the circumstances of your life, and the superstructure is culture, is everything like the family, religion, education, government, all the social interactions. They are the product of the material conditions. And this is an interesting thing, materialist interpretation of reality. For Marx, there is nothing outside the material world. There are no the religious beliefs are just superstitions, and the human mental reality is just a simple effect of the material conditions. This is something that has been very influential in the humanities. And one more thing, Marx believed that humanities is not just to understand. Philosophy is not just to understand people, it's to change the world. So the purpose of philosophy is to change the world. And let's now look at Freud's idea. For Freud, everything happens in the human mind. And the social reality, the material reality involving humans is just the expression of complicated and troubled reality of the human mind. So the human mind for Freud, it's like an iceberg. You just see a little bit, and this is the conscious bit. This is something that you know, something that you are aware of. The ideas, thoughts, feeling of which we are aware. But beneath that, like the iceberg, beneath the surface, beneath the conscious mind, we have much more, and we have a lot of the factors that influence us. So there are three elements. The ego, a bigger part of it is conscious, but there is something which is not yet conscious, something like the forgotten memories from your early childhood. This is the ego. The superego is the ideals, the moral principles that people internalize. And the id is the unconscious. The superego is basically unconscious. Almost all of it is unconscious. Id is absolutely unconscious. This is something at the very bottom. This is the pleasure principle. This is the seeking of pleasure. This is the urges and desires and complexes that people have. And if you want to imagine and kind of visualize it, imagine the ego part as your normal self, an adult. This is a human being that interacts with other humans in the world. The superego is your internal parent. It's like the voice of your mother or father in your head, who tells you what to do, who tells you what is good or bad, who tells you what is your duty, what you should and shouldn't do. You may rebel, you may obey, but this is the voice of the parent, the superego. And the id, it's like a spoiled little baby, somewhere deep in your psyche. The baby that wants to have whatever they want now. They want instant gratification. If not, they will scream and shout and throw a tantrum. So basically, this is like a spoiled brat. You love this baby, but it is a bit obnoxious. So this is the ego, the superego, and the id. Freud generally was very interested in the development of children, how children grow up, and he believed they go through certain phases. He called it the oral, anal, and phallic stages, because he was mostly interested in boys, of course. This is the late 19th century. Nobody was too interested in girls at that point. He believed that this is the way that boys develop. So first, when they drink from the mother's breast, so they concentrate on the mouth, then they become toilet trained, so they concentrate on the anus, which is the bottom part, and then they become aware of their sexual urges, and this is the phallic stage. He believed that most of this is ruled by what he called the Oedipus complex. This is based on a mythological story about King Oedipus, who had a curse put on him. So whatever he do, he would end up killing his father and marrying his mother. And the myth really shows how, despite his best intentions and his best efforts to not to fall prey to this curse, this happens. So Freud believed that this shows a psychic reality for a little boy who loves his mother and wants to marry his mother and is jealous of his father. So this is a natural stage in the development. He believed that this internalized conflict with the father is the driving force for the psyche. He believed in the role of the unconscious, the fears, the shame, the immorality, the unacceptable desires that, according to him, everybody have. Probably they do. Some of this we are not aware of, but it actually influences our behavior, because every human has like two forces tearing them apart, one towards life and one towards death. This is what Freud believed. The bottom line is everything is in the mind, and what is in your mind is probably something perverse. So we continue next week. Thank you. See you next week.